The story happens in Gotham City, 1981. Arthur Speck, Joaquin Phoenix, fills in as a jokester for employee for an organization called Haas. He battles with serious misery by and by, however discovers some type of positive thinking in performing for other people and attempting to make individuals snicker. He is entrusted with publicizing a store by moving and waving a sign around. On one such event, the sign gets grabbed by a gathering of troublemaker youngsters, constraining Arthur to pursue them into a back street. They crush the sign against his face and continue to kick him while he's down barbarously. In this time, Gotham is battling with wrongdoing, joblessness, and destitution. Arthur visits a social specialist for his drug, as well as his continuous emotional well-being issues. On the transport ride home, a little youngster checks Arthur out. He causes senseless faces to entertain the kid, however his mom advises Arthur to let him be. Arthur starts to giggle insanely and wildly. At the point when the mother questions him, he gives her a card that makes sense of that he has a state of mind that makes him chuckle the way that he does. Arthur gets back to a skyscraper condo project, where he resides with his debilitated mother, Penny, Frances Conroy. After supper, they sit and watch a television syndicated program with Murray Franklin, Robert De Niro. Arthur envisions himself being on the show and definitely standing out enough to be noticed. In his dream, Arthur charms the crowd and Murray by letting them know that he deals with his mom. Murray connects with Arthur and welcomes him up in front of an audience before everybody, where they share a familial hug. It is uncovered that Penny used to work for Thomas Wayne, Brett Cullen, and is fixated on the tycoon and has been presently keeping in touch with him to attempt to better their day-to-day environment. At Haas, Arthur is given a weapon for security by his colleague Randall, Glenn Fleshler, after he catches wind of the robbing occurrence. Arthur is both hesitant and eased to get such a gift as guns are banned working, yet before long finds his certainty becoming subsequent to getting the weapon. Notwithstanding, not long after this, he is faced by his cold and barbarous chief, who condemns him for losing the sign and removes the expense of it from his compensation. Arthur answers exclusively by grinning sharply. Arthur meets and becomes beguiled by one of his neighbors, a single parent named Sophie Drummond, Zazie Beetz. She addresses him amenably about relating issues that he can connect with. Notwithstanding, while at the same time attempting to establish a connection with her, he seems off-kilter and unusual around her. At a certain point, he goes through his day following her. Afterward, she drops by his condo and inquires as to whether he was following her, and he concedes that he was. However, she doesn't appear to be put not quite right by it. He welcomes her to a stand-up satire show that he is performing at. She is reluctant, however is prevailed upon by his appeal and funny bone. Arthur watches entertainers perform to assist him with acquiring some understanding into the art, yet feels more abnormal and awkward as his beyond ridiculous chuckling isn't authentic. Arthur goes to the parody club for his exhibition. His apprehension consumes him and, as a survival technique, unexpectedly ends up giggling so hard that he can scarcely talk. He then, at that point, starts heading out into his daily schedule, which is actually a major buzzkill. Sophie seems, by all accounts, to be in the crowd, the main individual who is snickering at Arthur's jokes. This gives him the solace he wants to keep on kidding in spite of his inward torture and strife. Arthur later goes to a youngster's medical clinic to engage them as a jokester. He carried his weapon with him, and it drops out on the floor. Arthur's manager later berated him for this. Arthur argues briefly possibility, however his supervisor declines and flames him on the spot. To finish things off, Randall blames everything on Arthur by guaranteeing that Arthur got the firearm himself. On the metro train ride home from Haas in full jokester getup, Arthur spots 3 alcoholic youthful money road types working for Wayne Ventures pestering a lady. Arthur begins snickering unexpectedly and draws the consideration of the men, while the lady shrewdly escapes from that vehicle. The men approach Arthur and fake him and his chuckling before they begin to beat him. Arthur retaliates justifiably, yet they group up, and steadily beat him to the floor. Having had enough, Arthur then takes out his firearm and fires 2 of them dead justifiably prior to following the last person out of the train and killing him on the steps. In shock over what he just did, Arthur retreats into a nearby public men's room. After a moment of frantic contemplation, he finds a force rising within him, and he begins to dance by himself. At this moment, he sees himself in the dirty mirror as a battered and smeared and yet powerful clown and begins to embrace it. He hides the gun and then returns to the apartment building where he meets and kisses Sophie for the first time. The news of the 3 murders spreads, with some seeing it as an attack on the wealthy, while others support the act. Thomas Wayne speaks out and condemns it, labeling the lower class as clowns, which becomes a symbol they readily embrace. The next day, Arthur cleans out his locker at Ha-Ha's but not before confronting Randall about betraying him and breaking the time-punching machine. He then leaves, feeling high-spirited and free. News reports show clown rioters protesting through the city and wreaking trouble, condemning the higher privileged. Arthur sees that he has inadvertently caused this and begins to see his true potential, which makes him genuinely delighted. Arthur later finds one of Penny's letters to Thomas, which indicates that Arthur is Thomas' son. Arthur goes to Wayne Manor, where he meets young Bruce Wayne, Dante Pereira Olsen. After performing a magic trick for Bruce, he sticks his hands through the gate and forces Bruce to smile, realizing deep within that they may or may not be brothers. However, Alfred, Douglas Hodge, comes to intervene and tell Arthur to leave. Arthur mentions his mother and her involvement with Thomas. Alfred says he remembers Penny, but that she was lying to him. Arthur attacks and nearly strangles Alfred through the bars but then notices that Bruce is watching. Arthur then gets hold of himself and flees the Wayne premises. That evening, Arthur finds Thomas at a public art theater event. Arthur infiltrates the theater by impersonating an usher. He follows Thomas Wayne into a men's room and tries to confront him with the potential of him being his father. Arthur mentions Penny, whom Thomas also remembers. While Thomas also acknowledges that Penny used to work for him as part of his housekeeping staff, he says that she was delusional and that there's no way Arthur could be his son. Thomas also explains that Penny never told Arthur that he was adopted, which Arthur strongly rejects before uncontrollably laughing in Thomas's face. Thomas, unaware of Arthur's condition, becomes defensive and punches Arthur in the face before having him thrown out of the building. Arthur returns home, where he tortures himself by slamming his head on the refrigerator in a fit of depression and longing. The next day, 2 police detectives, Burke, Wiggum, and Garrity, Bill Camp, go to Arthur's apartment to question him on the subway murders due to the word that the suspect was wearing clown makeup, and they know Arthur lost his job earlier that day. Arthur denies any involvement and gets the detectives to leave. Not long after, Penny falls ill and is hospitalized. Sophie sits by Arthur as he tends to his mother. In the hospital, Arthur sees that Murray's TV show is playing a clip from his stand-up routine, but he is hurt to see that Murray only played it to mock Arthur. Arthur later receives a phone call from a rep for Murray's show. He is invited to appear as a guest, which Arthur reluctantly accepts. After studying other interviews on the comedy show, Arthur decides to commit suicide in front of the live audience, thinking it will make them laugh. Seeking hard proof, Arthur goes to Arkham Asylum and speaks to a clerk, named Carl, Brian Tyree Henry, who has a file on Penny. When Carl says he can't give Arthur the info he wants, Arthur snatches the file and runs away to read it. Once away and hidden in a stairwell, Arthur opens the documents and reads them, finding that Thomas was telling the truth. According to the documents, the reality is that Penny adopted Arthur after he was found abandoned as a baby, and she abused him, tying him to a radiator and beating him alongside her abusive boyfriend. One part of the file mentions Arthur having a head injury, which is most likely what caused his laughing condition. Arthur returns to the hospital and tells Penny that he thought his life was a tragedy, but he sees it's a fucking comedy. With that, he smothers Penny to death. Arthur goes back home and breaks into Sophie's apartment. She sees him and is terrified, asking him to leave for the sake of her daughter. Arthur asks her if she has ever had a really bad day, to which she replies that she doesn't even know him. Through this, it is revealed that every other moment featuring Sophie was just in Arthur's head. A broken and frustrated Arthur apologizes for his intrusion and leaves Sophie alone, storming out of her apartment. Arthur starts to get ready for his appearance on Murray's show and paints his face white. He is visited in his apartment by Randall and another former co-worker, a dwarf named Gary, Lee Gill. They offer condolences after they hear about Penny's death, but then Randall begins mentioning Burke and Garrity going to their apartments to question them about the subway murders. Arthur realizes that Randall is only seeking a way to use Arthur in order to cover his own butt and then snaps, brutally stabbing Randall twice in the face before smashing his head against the wall. A terrified Gary questions Arthur's deeds and begs to be let go. Arthur agrees to before playfully scaring him as a prank. Gary tries to undo the lock on Arthur's door but is unable to due to his height. He asks Arthur to open the door for him, to which Arthur immediately agrees, pausing once to thank Gary for being the only person in his life who was nice to him. Arthur kisses Gary on the forehead and lets him go. Arthur then dyes his hair green, puts on full clown makeup, and dons a burgundy suit. He then dances down the stairways, fully embracing his insanity and carefree life. Burke and Garrity find Arthur dancing in the street and move in to arrest him. Arthur runs, and they chase him into the subway train where dozens of other Gotham citizens are dressed like clowns after being inspired by the murders. Arthur hides his face with a clown mask, which he steals from a protester, and inadvertently starts a brawl in the train cars. As the detectives pursue Arthur, one clown gets in the way, and Burke accidentally shoots him dead when they struggle with his gun. The clowns pull the detectives out of the subway and start beating them relentlessly, allowing Arthur to get away, moving smoothly through the police forces which swarm the area. At the TV station, Arthur meets Murray and his agent Gene, Mark Maron. Before he goes on, Arthur asks Murray to introduce him as Joker, since Murray referred to him as such when playing his clip. Murray asks Arthur if his clown makeup has political agendas behind it, to which Arthur replies, "I don't believe in that. I don't believe in anything." While waiting to be introduced, Arthur sees Murray broadcasting a clip of a struggling Arthur trying to tell a joke. This causes Arthur's mind and plans to change, and then he dances out into the spotlight. Arthur goes out as the show begins. He awkwardly tells Murray a joke, which he finds funny for its dark humor, though nobody else does. After being confronted with this, Arthur continues by admitting to the subway murders. Murray and the audience slowly realize that Arthur is serious. Arthur argues that the audience only cares for the victims because Thomas Wayne spoke for them, but anyone else like Arthur would be ignored and walked over. Murray and the audience grow angrier with Arthur, but so does he. Murray scolds Arthur, which escalates into Arthur snapping and telling another joke, Thomas and Martha dead in front of Bruce. Meanwhile, Arthur has been arrested and is being taken by the police. Arthur looks out the window and laughs gleefully as he sees the destruction and chaos he has caused. Just then, the clowns in an ambulance run into the car, killing the cops and freeing Arthur, who is injured and unconscious. When he awakes, Arthur finds himself surrounded by a mob of cheering mobsters in clown masks. The rioters then cheer Arthur on as he stands on a car and embraces their admiration. Now that he has gotten the recognition he has long desired, he dances to their cheering and then pauses, finding that his nose is bleeding profusely. He then spreads the blood across his upper lip and grins before standing before them, elevated like a god. Sometime later, Arthur is locked up in Arkham Asylum. He laughs after telling this story and visualizes a young Bruce standing over his parents in the alley. Realizing that he has, in a way, turned Bruce into himself, Arthur laughs some more, finding this genuinely hilarious. He meets a new social worker, April Grace, and says he wants to tell her a joke, but she wouldn't get it. A few minutes later, Arthur then steps out of the room, leaving a trail of bloody footprints behind before he is chased around by orderlies.